Well, hello and welcome, or maybe welcome back. This is Sean Smith with Learning Research Network, the LRN, and today we're talking about, and this is a series, on this idea of planning and designing for all learners in our Catholic schools. Now, many of us will think about that from an inclusionary perspective, and I'm right on board there. You know, the LRN is focused on struggling learners and those with disabilities, and how we better plan and design, educate, use specially designed instruction to make sure we meaningfully include them in that answer to the call, all are welcome in our Catholic schools. Now, when we think inclusion in our Catholic schools, there's often some poster children that come to mind. And yes, there's our Holy Father sitting with that young lady, I think it was a young lady, that sat there unexpectedly, and the Holy Father just took it in stride. And the other image there is my son, Nolan. He gained the freshman, not 15, the freshman 40 probably, but he's walking down, having graduated from the University of Kansas in the transition to post-secondary education program. Here at the University of Kansas, we have a 2-year program. And for those unaware, there's 300 plus, probably 320 growing strong, universities throughout the United States creating programs for individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities, 2 4-year programs and the like. But let's go back to Catholic education. When we think of Catholic education, we tend to think of individuals with disabilities, or particularly individuals with Down syndrome, autism, when it comes to Catholic education and inclusion. And yet today, what I want to argue is that if we think that way and start planning and designing in that way, we're going to run into a lot of headaches. A lot of headaches our public school friends and colleagues have really been challenged with for the last 40 to 50 years, and they haven't figured it out. Instead, we're a family in Catholic education, are we not? And of course, we as a parish family, as a diocesan, archdiocesan, as a school family, we know we have a lot of learning variability in our building. And we know it's growing. We know it's grown since post-COVID. Sorry, I had that post-secondary word in my mind. But post-COVID, my goodness, what do we have? We have students with anxiety. We have students with literacy challenges. We have students with a variety of other learning needs. And with those individuals, when we think of our Catholic schools, it's not just then individuals with Down syndrome, autism, that we need to plan and design around accordingly. And so what I want to do for a few minutes here is get us thinking about this learner variability. And for us, appreciating who we serve is one of my areas of focusing on. And then answer that question as well, then how do we plan for the needs of the variability of the students we serve? And the other question I want us to focus on and or answer is, how do we design effective instruction? And I can tell you that plan for typical and then accommodate, that's 20th century. We can't do that anymore. And one of the reasons we can't do it is that not only do we, as Catholic educators, have more students with disabilities coming into our schools than ever before. Most of us have 15 to 20% of our accepted population in our local building and or in our diocese or archdiocese schools with identified disabilities. And then we have a host of other individuals with what I'm going to target as learner variability with a variety of other areas. And that's what we're going to try to explore today. So in exploring it, some of the individuals I'm thinking about that come to mind for me that I've already started talking about for individuals with that learner variability are those students with anxiety. Do we not have a growing number, especially if we're working at the secondary, the high school level or the middle school level or even upper elementary? My goodness, I've seen this in my own family. I've seen this with the students I serve at the college level. I'm here at the University of Kansas, and the undergraduates, I'll ask them to raise their hand. How many individuals know of someone and or family member and or themselves that are dealing with issues of anxiety? Not a hand is not raised today. Now, we also know that variability could be everything from the fact that maybe our parish school is serving more non-Catholics than ever before. So when we're thinking religious education or when we're facilitating prayers or going to church or some of these things that in the past we wouldn't have to plan and design differently, we wouldn't have to intervene differently, but now we're realizing, wait, we have a number of families here, maybe it's a growing minority that don't go to Sunday, don't go to church on Sundays, they're not Catholic, and everything in between. But it also could be the variability of different households, right? Socioeconomic status. Maybe that's changing. Or maybe the fact that we have more children that are coming to us that are being raised by mom or dad, not mom and dad, or grandma, or aunt and uncle, or another adult in the home. But then we have that variability in struggling learners when it comes into consideration for reading below grade level, or I'm writing not at the same level as my peers, or I'm challenged with my executive functions, organization, memory. And you maybe think, well, Sean, those students will be identified with disabilities. And oh, no, they will not. There's so many individuals that are growing now that they'll never be served with an identified disability because they're just struggling with those areas. But it doesn't mean that they're going to be typical either. They're going to be individuals that we need to plan and design around differently. Now, the fortunate thing is that there's examples of how biblical examples, or examples within our church, how we've had to, and the Lord has asked us to plan and design for a variety of different things, right? Now, bear with me for a moment, but let's think of Noah. Noah, Sean, first of all, isn't that a bit of a myth or a story? Or, well, I'm going to go back to the Bible, and the Old Testament talks about Noah, right? And Noah is asked by God to build an ark. And sadly, Bill Cosby has a great routine on this. Bill Cosby in his personal life is inappropriate. But just think about Noah and him being asked by God to do this and the years it took to build that ark, and probably the behavior with his neighbors and everyone else in terms of what are you doing? Now, it's not the ark I'm concentrating on. It's rather the variability of the fact that he had to build the ark. And then he had to bring 2 by 2 animals from, oh my goodness, all over the area. Animals of different climate. Think of it, animals of different climate. Animals, different diets. And my goodness, some of the diets were of the animals. So prey versus predator. Oh my goodness, how we'd have to separate for that. How we'd have to design the ark, not simply to be able to accommodate all that, but what's it going to do with all that waste? Where's it going to put all the food? All that planning for the variability of all those animals that he is bringing on to try to support due to the flood. Now, again, you may be saying, well, Sean, Noah, I'm not exactly sure with that, but go back to our own school and go back to the growing variability in our own classroom. And yeah, maybe have a little fun with Noah as well, because seriously, are the lions and the lambs going to be next to each other? And of course, some of those things from the rainforest in terms of the different animals, are they going to be in the same place as those that survive in the plains of Africa? Probably not. But I'll bring it back to close to home. And I know many of you, hopefully I've got you thinking about this, but I'm going to take my own family. And this is a picture of my 4 children. And oh goodness, there was days where it was crazy having them that age, but now I look back and go, wouldn't it be wonderful that the daughter is now 25 and the young one now is 19, about to be a sophomore in college. But I think of my own family, and I think of the variability there as a microcosm for the variability we're dealing with in our classroom that we have to plan and design around accordingly. So Bridget, she's that strong reader, right? We have those strong readers, and honestly, there's days where we can do very little, and we will not have a negative impact on that strong reader. They'll be able to independently take it, run with it, have the textbook, the materials they have, and be able to learn, even if we might have a bad day. Then there's the individuals with identified disabilities, Nolan, right? And yes, it may not be Down syndrome, although he's our poster child, but it could be autism, it could be learning disabilities, it could be attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, it could be a variety of other things. Then there's JJ, the recent graduate of Creighton University, a Jesuit school in Omaha, Nebraska. I think he actually graduated, with honors in the dean's list, and yet he's the type of student with major attention issues. He's the one that did get extended time on tests. He's the one that did get a quiet room to take his test. He's also the one that would have lost his head if it wasn't tied on. The stories I could tell, but we all have those students that are distractible. Maybe they're attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, but maybe they're just simply poor executive function skills that we've really come to realize post-COVID. And then there's Mara. She's that COVID kid, right? And we're going to have those COVID kids for years that they could have been COVID in kindergarten, and now they're in 4th or 5th grade. It could have been that they're COVID in 4th or 5th grade. Now they're entering upper middle school or into high school. They've been impacted by COVID, and they'll continue to be impacted by COVID. Well, how do we plan and design around them accordingly? And let me kind of think about this very briefly, and then we'll take a break. But let's think of it from a university perspective where welcome, you're expected to the University of Kansas. And in that respect, that as a scholar, you're going to be a scholar athlete. And the scholar athlete, of course, you're going to play a variety of different sports. So maybe it's soccer, or maybe it's baseball, maybe it's cheer, maybe it's dance, maybe it's crew, maybe it's football or basketball. The list goes on. But the beautiful thing about a lot of our college athletes is that they're going to be supported. They're going to work hard. They're going to study. They're scholar athletes, but they're also going to be at the University of Kansas of the world. They'll be head to toe outfitted in all sorts of clothing. If it rains, we've got a raincoat for you. If it's warm out, we've got shorts for you. But the only thing we don't have is formal wear. Now, we also are going to equip you with a variety of shoes. But we believe in this idea that there's not so much variability. There's a lot of typical aspects of these athletes, all wonderful athletes, but there's a typical. And the typical we believe in giving out shoe sizes is we're going to go with what's average for shoe sizes sold in the United States. And that's size 8 women. So if you have a size 8 women, great. 8.5, you're okay. We'll give you an extra pair of socks. 7.5, I think is a little tight, but we'll be able to perform. But size 7 and below, size 9 and above, I'm sorry, but by the time we get to a point where maybe the semester comes to an end, the first semester, we're going to realize that you're not performing at the level that we accepted you. And maybe we'll say, feel free to continue as a university scholar, but not as an athlete. Now, you may say, Sean, that's silly, but the reality is we've seen cartoons like this, where we say, okay, we're going to be fair, we're going to do everything's average, and in this instance, everyone's going to take the same exam, and they'll all have to climb a tree. And we look at this and go, that's silly, of course we don't do it. And yet if we don't agree with this variability aspect, and we don't actually plan and design with the variability in consideration, we are doing this comic in respect to aspects of what we're asking students to do. So I'd ask you, as we make a quick closure to this one, think about your own students. What do you know about their variability? We'll talk a little bit more about data when we return, but think about the type of data you have about your learners. You probably have a fair amount. And it may not just simply be about formative and summative data in terms of them as the performance on different types of assessments, but it also could be them as learners. So let's finish here just thinking about the fact that we may think inclusion, disabilities, Down syndrome, autism, learning disabilities, but I hope I've gotten you thinking about the fact that, well, actually, no, if I'm planning and designing for the inclusion of all individuals, I have to think about the variability of a growing variability of learners that will impact their learning. And as we mentioned before, it could be everything from a struggling reader, but it could be anxiety, it could be executive functions, it could be things in their environment, their home, all those other elements that we'll need to increasingly plan and design for if we want to be successful in supporting them. So we'll come on back and talk a little bit more about variability and then, of course, barriers. But in the meantime, take a break and maybe think about what type of information do you know about your students? What type of information are you collecting to better understand your student? Thanks so much.